My name is Victor Fuhrman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me now and we will explore these topics and so much more with fascinating guests, authors, and experts who will guide us to Destination Unlimited. Since I started this program in 2016, my emphasis has been on the crossroads of science and spirituality. Through a broadening of our understanding of subtle energy, it is apparent that in many areas, rather than crossing, those roads are actually one and the same. One of those areas is energy healing. The mind-body subtle energy connection is a key element to healing on all levels. How may we combine insights from mainstream science, psychology, and subtle healing modalities into a truly holistic approach to healing and recovery? My guest this week on Destination Unlimited, Cyndi Dale, has done just that. Cyndi Dale is an internationally renowned author, speaker, healer, and business consultant. She's president of Life System Services, through which she has conducted more than 65,000 client sessions and presented training classes throughout Europe, Asia, and the Americas. Cyndi's the author of more than 25 books, including Llewellyn's Little Book of Chakras and Awaken Clairvoyant Energy. She serves as an intuitive coach, energy healer, and business advisor. Clients are commonly referred by professionals, including psychiatrists, medical doctors, and therapists. She also offers training, classes, and apprenticeship programs around the world. Her website is cindydale.com. That's spelled CYNDIDALE.com. And she joins me this week to discuss her latest book, Energy Healing for Trauma, Stress, and Chronic Illness. Please join me in welcoming to Destination Unlimited, Cyndi Dale. Welcome, Cyndi.
Thank you, Victor. I'm very honored to be here. I'm interested to see what destinations we go toward today.
Well, that's very good of you to call it. And let's just say that our destinations will be unlimited today. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
When we welcome a guest to Destination Unlimited for the first time, we ask them to share their paths and how it led to their work. What was your early life like, and how did you discover your sensitivity to subtle energy and intuitive abilities?
Well, good question. And my response is probably, kind of shared frequently on this show. I was one of those strange little kids, unusual, extrasensory, bothersome to my parents. I mean, ever since I can remember, and I remember being alive actually back in my mother's womb, I could see colors around people. I could see sound waves and energies. I could feel what emotions somebody was going through. I could hear spirits, talk to spirits. And I thought that was perfectly natural. I knew my parents reacted to it, but typically they would just say things to me like, you're just too imaginative, or why don't you just let that go and get your job done or your task done or your chores done or this or that or the other thing. And it took me a while to catch on to my dad's attitude, which is that things supernatural aren't natural. I think they are. They're just natural plus. And so, it was a very unhappy family. I think that's probably, unfortunately very typical. So when I was about 12, 13, I decided I was just going to be done with it all. And I had one of those near-death experiences that wasn't very fruitful. I remember leaving my body, looking down. I had told my family I was going to die, and I got really sick. So I did. I left. I looked down. I thought, I'm just going to be so glad to get out of here. And I didn't get very far before I heard this voice say, you have to go back. And being Norwegian and stubborn, I said, no. And the voice said, again, you have to go back. And I said, no again. And then finally the voice said, well, you haven't done anything. So I was forced back, found myself in the body. And you know what? My gifts disappeared because I decided I was so angry that I wasn't going to use them. And they started to open up again when I went to therapy as a client. And I had a therapist who said, you're not only codependent and compulsive and all these different things. I was 19 at the time, but you're also psychic. And Victor, I was really lucky because after that point, I was able to travel a lot. And I started learning the ways of the shaman, intuition, healing, herbology. I'm not an herbologist. I can't remember one name for the other. But I started learning from people in other countries, in countries and villages where being an intuitive, being a healer was very acceptable. And so that really set me up, was being able to be within societies in which being paranormal is also considered normal.
Actually, we had some very similar paths, not completely the same, but I was told that I had an overactive imagination when I started reporting the things that I was seeing and experiencing. And I also have to shut it down in my teens and my early adulthood and reopen it later in life. But you share a fascinating story about how your life purpose clarified for you in a dream that you had while traveling in Morocco. What happened in that dream?
Oh, that's one of my favorite experiences. I was in Morocco for a couple weeks with 3 other friends. We ended up in Casablanca and the luggage ended up in Amsterdam for a few days. Right? As life is wont to do to you. So I bought these super cool robes and wore them for a while. But I had a series of dreams when I was there. And I had actually been told intuitively, go to Morocco. You need to go to Morocco and you need to be as if you've never been, which I think is a fascinating job or task. And I think I'm still working on it. But in one of my dreams, I was actually it was in the Sahara in the dream, but there were just all these buildings and somebody came up to me and said, thank you. And I said, for what? He goes, well, you helped start all this. You helped start all these businesses. You helped me and all these others find their purpose. And I was like, well, I don't really think I'm that important. But I went to my shop. I had the smallest shop in like one of those low hanging malls, the single floor malls, very, very tiny, very, very tiny shop. And you could barely fit a couple people in. There was a counter and in there was a case with eyeglasses in it. And I stood next to the case and every time somebody would come in, all I would do was take out the eyeglasses, put them on their eyes, help them look in the mirror, and they would go, wow, this is who I am. And then I would take the eyeglasses back and move forward with the next person. And what a lovely way to explain a purpose. I just really help reflect people back to themselves or help them see themselves the way, the greater oneness sees them. And, that's really all my job is. I am very visual, so I use my clairvoyance when I'm working with people, but I think I'm basically just a mirror.
It's interesting the way that your dream reflected that back to you and put you on your path.
Isn't that an interesting synchronicity? Like I had to have my own gift reflected to me, just like my clients and students need their gifts reflected to you. It is really interesting. I'm just curious, how do you describe your work as an intuitive and healer? I mean, because it's fun to compare how we perceive ourselves.
I have not done this professionally up until this point. I had a career in business, a day job in welding and industrial supplies, compressed gases, and certified welding inspector for 42 years. But during that time, I had a calling, and that calling was to healing in the late 80s. I got involved in Reiki healing, and Reiki healing led to me attending an interfaith seminary here in New York and getting ordained as an interfaith minister. And in the process, I wanted actually to get ordained so that I could do laying on of hands in hospitals. In those days, you either had to be ordained or a licensed massage therapist to do that. But as Spirit would have it, and as the path would have it, I had a higher calling. And that higher calling included counseling people after 9/11 for the Red Cross at the Family Assistance Center here in New York, and many other opportunities to work and serve with people in hospice situations and other situations. And my work involves a couple of things in listening, and especially sacred listening, which I think is the most precious gift we can give to anyone else. Truly hearing what their story is and what they have to say. And in doing so, then reflecting in messages that come to me back to them, advice, things that they may need to hear. And they can either choose to resonate with it and move forward or not. But this is the gift that I've been given.
That's beautiful. So it's more of a hearing and reflecting orientation, whereas mine, to some extent, is a seeing and reflecting. Gets to the same place. Like it
Absolutely.
supports their spirit. It supports their light.
Absolutely. And I also see, I say to people, I'm an egg clair. I have all the clairs. I'm clairvoyant, clairaudient, clairsentient. I'm an egg clair. So.
That's good.
And I think you must be too.
I am. I have the clair empathy. I use it all the time in my sessions. And the clair audience, which is the hearing, and the clear seeing. Clair empathy is what I use on my daily life the most often. You know, if my body's like not going to move to the left and will move to the right, I move to the right. Or if I don't, something doesn't strike me right, or my gut turns inside out, I don't participate. So I use my empathy a lot to make my own decisions.
Absolutely. Very quick story for you, because we're going to be coming to the end of the first segment here. But in 1975, I was stationed in Korea. I was in the Air Force at the time, and through actually dirty acupuncture needles, because they didn't sterilize them back then over there, I had ended up with hepatitis B and got very sick. And the doctor told me that I had a 1 in 10 chance of survival, and they had sent a letter to my mother from the Red Cross that I was not going to make it and all this nonsense. And I said to the doctor, can I have an anatomy book? Something told me I wanted to look at a picture of a healthy liver. And this is before I had visualization meditation as part of my path. And so he questioned it, but he brought me the book. I looked at the healthy liver. I started visualizing the healthy liver. All of a sudden, my hands gravitated over my liver. I started feeling this wonderful sensation, and eventually, some point, fell asleep. The next morning, they took blood, and the doctor had to have it taken twice. And he came back and said, what did you do? And I told him. He says, you're crazy. I said, why? He said, because last night you were going to die, and this morning your blood levels are practically normal, and we've never seen anything like it. That was my awakening experience.
Love it. There you are. You just used the energetic template, or you guessed right.
That's
and
it.
Worked.
That's it. My guest is Cyndi Dale. We're going to be talking about her new book, Energy Healing for Trauma, Stress, and Chronic Illness, after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Grab a cup of tea or a glass of wine and tune in for inspired conversations with publisher Linda Joy on Tuesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern. Linda creates sacred space for leading female luminaries, empowering authors, heart-centered female entrepreneurs, coaches, and healers. A soulful venue where guests openly share the fears and obstacles they've overcome, wisdom and lessons learned, and the personal journey that led them to the transformational work they do in the world. Inspired conversations to empower you on your path to authentic, soulful living.
So I'm a cat, and I just moved in with this new human, and she's got this little toy she's always playing with, all day long. Tap, 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 bloop, bloop. She can't put it down. There it is. Oh, and get this. She even talks to it. Last week, she asked it for Chinese, and guess what? Egg rolls showed up. Like magic. Humans have cool toys.
A person is the best thing to happen to a shelter pet. Be that person. Adopt. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the ShelterPetProject.org.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week is Cyndi Dale. She's the author of the new book, Energy Healing for Trauma, Stress, and Chronic Illness. Cyndi, so how did your healing path unfold for you?
Well, I started to travel a lot in my 20s into my 30s and met healers and started to get trained. So after a while, I started to look for those experiences. So I took myself off to Costa Rica and Belize and Morocco and Russia and different places. But I was working in public relations and fundraising during that time, had a child. And then the voice, I have that voice that talks to me, said, quit your job. And I'm like, well, there's this thing called bills, like having a career that might be important. It's like, no, just quit your job. So I could have gone two paths at that point. So I went down both, not being a very trusting person at about age 28. So I lined up some consulting work in nonprofit management. And as the voice told me to do, I made cards for being a psychic healer. And I used those terms at that time. Now I use the word intuition or whatever, but it's kind of the same thing. And I made these beautiful rose-colored pink cards with a rose at what was then Kinko's. Now it's a FedEx store. And I was so embarrassed to pick them up that I was just going to take them and go home and hide them, just throw them away. I was like, oh my gosh, my family's just going to freak out. This is a weird thing to do decades ago. So I grabbed the cards, the box of them, and I'm literally going to go destroy them. And there was at the edge of the box, one of the cards that was taped on there. There was another woman in line with me. She saw the cards. She said, oh my gosh, do you do psychic readings? And in a faltering voice, I said, sorta. And she goes, I'm a hairdresser. I'll send you people. And my business started. And that was that. So
wow.
I know I am stubborn. I warned everybody in the first segment. So it really did take the voice to prompt me with each step. Then it was like, teach a class, then write a book based on the class, and then go do this and go do that. So, you'd think that I would be more open to the voice, and I am, but I don't really make it talk. Whatever you want to call it, God, the divine, the universe, higher self, it talks when it wants to talk. And I've found that it's usually not dictatorial, but very clear. And one time it said to me, your life will unfold if you do as you're told. So I just do what I'm told. I figured that one out anyway.
Absolutely. It's interesting that you mentioned about the business card, because I actually am expecting an order this coming week of 2 sets of business cards. And one of them is going to be as a consultant for the 42-year career that I had in that welding industry. And the other is for my new career as a full-time, basically a full-time spiritual counselor and coach. So absolutely, I resonate with that. And the voice told me, print 2 cards, don't cut out one, print 2 cards.
We do have some serendipity. At that time, I was going down 2 paths, straddling them simultaneously. And, to some extent, they're probably the same path because we're the same person. What color are your cards, though? Mine were pink, but yours are probably not pink.
No, actually, mine, I like nature settings, and mine is going to be a sunset on one card and something a little more formal on the other card. So, yeah.
Great.
So you've written several wonderful books that were published by Llewellyn, including a series of little books. Please share with us about some of your previous books.
Yes, I have. I've written 27 books, which is an awful lot of books. Some are out of print at this point. So through Llewellyn, I've written a little book of empathy, which is pocket size. It's a great book about the energetics of being empathic, not just the sociological or the feeling-based stuff, but what does it mean when you pick up other people's energy, and how can you do that in a good and gracious way for you and them? I have a little book on how to access and use your clairvoyance, your clairaudience, a little book about the chakras. And, the irony is I also have a bunch of big books. So I tend to make them really big or really small. One of my books for interest is Llewellyn's Complete Book of Chakras. My computer is sitting on it because it's 1,200 pages. So it can hold up almost everything. It can press a flower. It can iron your clothes. You can do just about anything. And it actually has sold really well because it's got a world's worth of knowledge about chakras in one place. A couple of my clients have actually subdivided the sections and put them in separate sort of units so they can carry them around a lot easier.
Wow, 1,200 pages. Wow, that's 4 books, really, 4 large books.
That's 3 years of my blood, sweat, and tears is what that is.
You read my mind, because I was just about to say, how long did it take you to put together 1,200 pages of a wonderful book? Yeah.
I think it was 2 years of writing, and I hired my own editor to follow behind me and clean me up, because I typically need to edit a chapter like 5 or 6 times. And I figured if I did all that, I'd never finish the book. So I would edit twice, and then she would keep editing for me. And I just kept moving and forward. And then there were pretty much a year's worth of edits once it got turned into Llewellyn too. So this is a well-edited book.
Wonderful. What inspired you to write your latest book, Energy Healing for Trauma, Stress, and Chronic Illness?
Well, that's a great question, because I think there's a subconscious rationale that I didn't know until a few months ago, as well as a conscious one. I've worked with a lot of clients, and most typically what's in the way of them being able to show up in life, be themselves, make happier decisions, be healthier, healed, all the good stuff is trauma. I consider trauma to be stress that doesn't unpin. So when we undergo through certain types of forces, often we also take in energies that are not our own when we're going through traumatizing situations. We get stuck, we get blocked, we get locked. So almost all of my clients, I work with these long-held or sometimes short-term traumas. But it wasn't connected to this year of all years, 2020, in terms of the pandemic and the uprisings and the changes and the questions and the confusion, until I got the draft of the book back in April, and I had to turn it around really quickly so it could go to print. And my editor said, you know what? We got this thing called a pandemic. You can add 12 pages if you want. So I did, about the virus, about environmental issues, about, this virus, more about viruses in particular, about how to help yourself if you're affected by SARS-CoV-2 and all this kind of stuff. So the timing was more divine than just, I think this can help people serving clients. Because here we are living in a very traumatizing time.
Now, before our current crisis, how many of us in the U.S. suffered from chronic illnesses, and how many died from these?
It's common. I mean, the statistics range anywhere from 30 to 70% of all Americans have or will have a chronic illness at some time in their life. Stress is 97% of most office visits. The death rate for chronic illnesses, if you throw heart attacks in there, put you at the majority, 70% or so. 50, 60, depends on your statistical research, of all deaths. I mean, because we're talking all the different, like WHO, the World Health Organization, says there's 88 diseases or illnesses that are chronic, that are autoimmune. And so we can include in there anything from depression and anxiety and the results of that to Parkinson's disease and MS, and even the after effects of cancer and or heart disease. So, I mean, think about pain. The pain rates are crazy. So we were already a chronically ill people across the board, across the world, before the pandemic.
With the current pandemic and the resultant illness and the emotional stress from COVID, our current societal upheaval, economic challenges, and radical life changes, many are dealing with situations we've never had before. What are you seeing in those who come to you for healing and coaching right now?
I'm seeing an uptake. It kind of mirrors what Dr. Daniel Amen, he wrote Change Your Brain, Change Your Life, has stated that there's a 30 to 50% increase in anxiety and depression. I'm seeing that. I'm seeing fear. I'm seeing lots of anger. I'm seeing people lashing out, and people are really lonely. And for a lot of people, they're scared. They're just scared of their bodies. They're scared of what's happening in their bodies. So one of the first things they ask me is, do you think I have COVID, or do you think I've had COVID? And then they start to list all their various symptoms and this and that and the other thing. And of course, most of them don't have COVID. They're conditions they already had, but they're accentuated. Everything's bigger, everything's stronger, everything's scarier to people. And I mean, I've put in place different measures, for people to work with me. I put out a lot of lower cost products because I know there's a lot of people who are unemployed. I mean, some people think 20 to 30% of all people are unemployed. So I'm trying to respond by putting helper videos out there and free downloads out there so that people can start helping themselves if they can't afford to get to somebody to talk with or to help them. And of course, there's old traumas being triggered all the time. So a lot of what people are going through, it's not It's current, but it's also not current. Everything old is going to be springing up during a time like this.
From a metaphysical, we're going to talk about energy and subtle energy in the second half of the show, but from a metaphysical, from an energy standpoint, what do you think this COVID virus represents?
I think it represents the lack of connectivity that most of us live through or with. And I think, therefore, it's an invitation to connectivity. Ironically, we could decide to connect through this time period. We could decide that China's not the enemy. We could decide that viruses don't look at the territory lines between countries. And we could figure out how to join together and help the great and the small, the young and the old.
I think it also is giving us an opportunity to re-examine our attitude toward the earth and Mother Nature, because a lot of these viruses, a lot of these ancient diseases were buried in the forests, and with deforestation, they're finding their way to the surface again.
And they will continue to do that because it works the same in the earth as it does in a human being. We have an original signature. I have an original energetic signature. It's body, mind, and soul. So do you. So does the earth. So does a dog. So does a platypus. And if we're exposed to that which is too far away, or there's a chasm between our original signature and what we're going through, there's a gap. And in the gap, there's illness. There's anxiety. There's challenges. We have gaps in the earth between how it's supposed to be treated and what's happening to it.
My guest is Cyndi Dale. She's the author of the new book, Energy Healing for Trauma, Stress, and Chronic Illness. Cyndi, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you and your wonderful work.
Yes, of course. My website is cindydale.com. It's CYNDIDALE.com. And my book is, and all of them are on Amazon.
Wonderful. We'll be back with more of Cyndi after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
You're listening to OTR FM, part of the IOM Radio Network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
When you wake up in the morning, are you excited for the new day? Are you passionate about your work? Are your relationships fulfilling? And finally, are you happy? I'm Mia Voce, your host and guide to the power of 5. Harness the forces of the universe and unleash your powers within. Join me each Tuesday, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on OMTimes Radio. And remember, anything is possible. You only just have to believe.
America, your children have an amazing superpower. They can help save lives by not having play dates. That's right. By replacing get-togethers with virtual play dates and video chats, they can help slow the evil spread of germs. And if your superheroes do go outside, make sure they continue their superhero wing by staying 6 feet away from others to protect everyone in America land. Find out more at coronavirus.gov. A message from the CDC and the Ad Council.
Hi, this is Bill Maher. I can find humor in almost anything, but one thing I never laugh about is cruelty to animals. If you don't get the joke either, write People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, 501 Front Street, Norfolk, Virginia, 23510.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week is Cyndi Dale. She's the author of the new book, Energy Healing for Trauma, Stress, and Chronic Illness. Cyndi, we're all aware of the standard lifestyle changes that mainstream medicine suggests for dealing with chronic illness and stress, including looking at diet, exercise, yoga, meditation. While all of these are beneficial, where do they fall short?
Well, and it is true that we want to address our diet. We want to exercise. We want to bring in meditation. We want to relax ourselves. We need to do deep breathing. And yet those are activities that we can't even adapt to or adopt if we don't deal with some of the inner stressors that are causing the real issues. So I believe that up to 99.999% of all reality is actually subtle or invisible. It's the unseen. Science would actually suggest the same, because if you take an object, 99.999% of it is invisible. We're only aware of what is concrete or tangible, of what we can touch or see. And most of what is anything is whatever you want to call it, quanta, subtle energy. They're energies that can move slower than the speed of light, but also faster than the speed of light. So, let's just say that you want to change your diet, which is a great thing, and you want to eliminate wheat or gluten, which is dandy. But is eating more fruit or vegetables going to make a difference if you don't heal the issues that caused you to overeat the other types of carbs, or if you don't invite your body to metabolize the energetics, the subtle energy that's in the veggies or the fruit? So almost everything, if it is determined, the health of it is determined by your subtle energetic relationship with it and the subtle energies that are within something, even a piece of fruit.
What are the stressors and forces on the quanta level, on the subtle energy level, that result in chronic illness?
Well, I think there's two activities that occur before we develop a chronic illness, such as an autoimmune issue. I also include in that category allergies and addictions. The first is that we typically go through a stressor that we get stuck in. And stressors are really a matter of being hit with or exposed to a force. Now, we can't see forces. Science talks about forces, but you can't really see a physical force. Even if you're hit in the head with a baseball, you can't see the force that carried the baseball into your head. So we have environmental forces, which are those that occur, of course, in the environment. That can be EMF, which we can't see. It could include volcanoes. You can see the effects of a volcano, but not the energies that volcano is spewing off. We've got physical forces, and those occur when we're interacting with like a physical object or we watch that happen. There's verbal forces, emotional forces, digital forces, spiritual forces, which are sort of more spiritual. And so if that's not challenging enough, that we're constantly being marauded, all right, and impacted by these invisible forces, these forces can also carry subtle energies on them. Like if Dad yelled at us a lot when we were growing up, we know that we were verbally accosted, but the energies that are invisible can also make their way into our body and take root in there. They're not our energies. And sooner or later, if we can't notice them or clear them or help ourselves or get help with those subtle energies of hatred or the stuff that makes us feel stupid or bad or whatever it is, our immune system will start to attack the energies that are not our own. It's going to miss. It's not going to be able to get them. Instead, our immune system will accidentally start beating up on our healthy cells. And guess what? Now you have a chronic problem. Now you have an autoimmune dysfunction. Autoimmune dysfunction is really being caused by our immune system going awry, attacking the healthy cells for no known reason. But there is a reason. We've got stuff in us that is not our own.
When working with someone with a chronic illness, what are the first questions you ask?
Well, the first thing I do is I bring them into an intuitive state, and I'm in an intuitive state, and I want to find out how much of what they're dealing with is their energy versus somebody else's. I was even doing this with my youngest son, who's a baseball pitcher. He was struggling with a certain move, and he's home training, et cetera, because of COVID. And before I went into his emotions, I just had him check in, ask his own heart, how much of what you're dealing with is yours versus something or somebody else's? And he said, 50% is not mine. So why should we work on somebody else's issue? That's just going to be a long process. So I said, well, let's let that go. And he's, been around me a long time, so I don't have to do a big jig to help him do that. He can just let it go. Guides take it where it needs to be. And then we work with what's left. And at that point, the second question is usually a process to find out what's the cause of what's happening. Where's the causal trauma? Where's the causal stress? You have to dig down in the root if you're going to uproot the tree.
Many of our listeners are familiar with various energy healing modalities, but let's start with some of the fundamentals. First of all, what is energy?
Energy is information that moves. That's it. It's simple. Everything's made out of energy, whether it's concrete or intangible, and it's all made out of energy, which is just data that vibrates. Everything is what it is because there's data in it or around it telling it to be that. And it also moves at certain rates. The atoms do, the molecules do, the quanta do. Those are the really fast little dudes that zip around in different dimensions. And so everything vibrates. The cool thing about understanding energy is the assumption then is if you change the information telling, say, a tumor to be a tumor, or you change the vibration, keeping the tumor a tumor, well, then maybe you can make the tumor disappear.
Energy is neither good nor bad. It's all about intention, isn't it?
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up, Victor, because we do tend to put a spin on what appears or disappears from our lives. Energy is neutral. It's just data. It's just vibrating. We come at energy with judgment. We come at it with whatever, projections we have. So I think, and you're getting to this, if we can neutralize our approach to a situation, we can be, I get that we're going to be somewhat subjective, right? But we can be as objective as possible. That gives us more power to change the data or the vibration if we need to do that.
There's different types of energy stressors. For example, what is the energy of grief like, and how may we address it?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. So I pull on therapy language to start getting into grief, because grief is typically in psychotherapy defined as sadness and anger, and you can have a mix of both. So to me, grief is some composite of sadness and anger. And if we have grief from a long time ago, and people feel grief all the time. I work a lot with people from China, like nearly 3-4 times a week. I do a client session early in the morning from people from China. And they almost always talk about grief, and they can feel it in their body. They know where it is. They know they've had it for a long time. And some of the reason that the grief doesn't dissipate or they can't clear it is because it's like glued together. It's a mixture of sadness and anger. And you have to help the person first know what they're sad about, and then know what they're angry about, and work with both of the different feelings if you're going to unpack the old grief.
What about the energy of trauma, the energy of abuse when we're children?
Oh, it's so hard. Because so many of us have been abused. The family I grew up in was I guess it's even now a typical alcoholic family with physical abuse, emotional abuse, lots and lots of pain, sexual abuse. It was just a very sad place to grow up. And so with a situation like that, especially when you're little and you're vulnerable and you don't know how to protect yourself, and frankly, you're not supposed to, all those different forces in the environment will impact you. So even watching, for instance, my mom physically hurt my father, even though she was, kind of inflicting him with a physical force that had anger in it, it was the same as if that happened to me. Watching my dad drink, I wasn't drinking with him, but I developed reactions to alcohol, and those stuck in my system. So I've had to deal with those. I've attracted alcoholics in my life because that's a way that we try to help ourselves work something through. We attract what we went through so we can be different, or we can try to make them be different, which doesn't really work. Or we can find a new way to perceive what happened and free ourselves or get freed. So the more challenges, the greater the challenges we're exposed to when we're young. For most of us, the longer it's going to take to unwind all of that. But the greater the gifts we're also going to obtain, because it's so worth the time, because we find ourselves, kind of on the other end of every trauma.
And in normal times, calling any other time normal, the stress and the trauma that are received by first responders is difficult. At this time, it must be impossible. How do you work with the energy of the trauma for the first responder?
Oh, I know, Victor. Isn't that challenging? Well, I will, of course, help to see if there's anything that's being triggered for them. But, even then, they're just going out into the battlefield over and over. And most frequently because they're caring people. And I would include people who work for Amazon, not just a hospital, right? These are people on the front line serving the rest of us. I would include grocery workers, to be honest. So anytime I have worked with clients on that front line, I try to teach them about energetic boundaries if they don't already know about them. As compassionate and caring as they are and need to be, they cannot keep absorbing other people's feelings, their fear, their loneliness, because the more they do that, the greater the chance is they're actually going to catch the virus or some other kind of illness. Doesn't matter what we let through our energetic boundaries. Those are the fields outside of us. Some of them are measurable, like their regular electromagnetic fields, electrical fields, etc. Most of them are immeasurable. They come from our subtle anatomy. And those subtle fields are programmed to let other people's energies in, if that's kind of who we are. So I have to help them not let all that stuff in.
Thank you for including essential workers along with the first responders. You're absolutely right, because they're under the same amount of stress as those who are responding with ambulances and fire engines and police. My guest is Cyndi Dale. She's the author of the new book, Energy Healing for Trauma, Stress, and Chronic Illness. We'll be back with more of Cyndi after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free, ascendinghearts.com.
I'm Kathy Williams, host of Sexy Mom Abundant Life radio show on Thursdays at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific. On the show, we explore living abundantly in every area of your life. Ways to let go of limiting patterns and beliefs and to step into the flow of creativity and possibility, knowing you are supported by the universe.
America, your children have an amazing superpower. That's right. They can help save lives by simply washing their hands. Just 20 seconds of thorough hand washing after they've coughed or sneezed or been outside can help fight against the dastardly spread of germs. Armed with only soap and water and hands, your superhero can protect you, your family, and everyone out there in America land. Amazing! Find out more at coronavirus.gov. A message from the CDC and the Ad Council.
These are the sounds of a dinner that almost didn't happen. A dinner now served, thanks to people like you. Due to COVID-19, 17 million more Americans may face hunger. Feeding America is helping our neighbors in need. And if you're able, you can too. Donations are being accepted at feedingamerica.org/coronavirus. Brought to you by the Ad Council and Feeding America, 200 food banks strong.
Tom has been a teacher for over 40 years. One day, I think one of the students had asked the question and he didn't remember the answer. And I also noticed that he was letting his class out earlier than they were supposed to let out. I was really starting to worry.
Levi and I talked about how it would change our lives, but he was there beside me.
When something feels different, it could be Alzheimer's. Now is the time to talk. Visit alz.org/ourstories to learn more. A message from the Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week is Cyndi Dale. She's the author of the new book, Energy Healing for Trauma, Stress, and Chronic Illnesses. Cyndi, what about the overall energy of uncertainty in these unusual times that all of us are feeling? How do we address that?
Well, I think that's what's leaving most people the most jittery, because ironically, nothing in life is certain, right? Even that we'll be here tomorrow. We know we'll be somewhere, but we don't know where. And yet, when we're growing up in these dysfunctional families that most of us have grown up in, one thing we want is certainty. We want to know that mom and dad are going to be nice. We want to know we can depend on them. And when we can't, we typically hold ourselves responsible. Like, oh, if I had just been nice, or if I had done my chores, or if I had not cried or whatever, things would be better, because we want safety. It's safety we're looking for. When we don't get it, which most of us didn't growing up, we convince ourselves that we make the difference, that we have the power to make the outside do what's going to be safe for us. We don't. We don't have that power. We didn't have that power. We can only manage what's inside of us, and to some extent what we're going to do. So uncertainty can seem like the enemy, I think, because of our childhood desires to feel safe. So somehow it's so important to make peace with uncertainty. And I like to do that spiritually. I like to tell myself, Cyndi, this world is uncertain. I'm not saying it's a complete illusion, because it certainly feels real, right, as we're going through it. But there's uncertainty. We don't know. And maybe there's something good about knowing that it's undependable and you can't control it all. Because then, from my point of view, I have to reach for a higher power, or for a higher source of goodness, or for assistance. And so to me, that's the remedy for the fear of uncertainty that we all have. This is the time that we go, okay, what within me do I know is certain? Well, I'm a good person. I'm a soul. I'm a light. And we all have to ask that question of ourselves sooner or later. What do I believe is greater than me? And so that's the only way through the fear of uncertainty, those two actions.
You outline a series of steps to address the stressors of chronic illness. What are those steps?
Well, I think first we've got to track the trauma that occurred that set up the autoimmune or chronic challenge. And so you can take a short time to do that, a long time to do that. But first, we actually do usually need to work on what happened to us outside to in that created an internal loop of problem or challenge. So go from the outside to the in. What happened? Let yourself brainstorm, work with somebody, journal, let yourself have dreams about that, etc. Once that has been addressed, or at least even described somewhat, then we focus inside. Then, we can meditate. We can uncover the lost self that's within. We can give compassion to ourselves. I actually talk about that if we have an autoimmune dysfunction, we have a part of us that's stuck in what I call a shock bubble. When we go through trauma, a part of us gets stuck inside in a shock bubble. We need to find that part of ourselves and start freeing him or her. Give new boundaries, speak to ourselves different. At that point, we're typically ready to stop any behaviors that cause harm to ourselves. Maybe we're cutting, maybe we're eating the wrong foods, maybe we're sleeping with not very healthy people. It's great to go to a 12-step program and start that behavior, as soon as we can. But a lot of times it doesn't work until we look for the trauma, find the lost self, start healing the lost self, and then we can start changing behavior.
I recently took a seminar on somatic trauma healing, and a great deal of this work involves the vagus nerve system. Please share with our listeners about the vagus system.
Yes, I'm a big fan of understanding the vagus nerve and what they call now the polyvagal system. So the vagus nerve is a cranial nerve that pretty much runs all the way down through the body from the head. And it is socially programmed. It really touches just about any organ and organ system. And I believe chakra, which are subtle energy centers that work with this invisible energy as well. And the vagus nerve holds our programming about, well, basically what's safe or not and how we can relate to other people or the inside of ourselves. So it determines a lot of time what we've experienced gets programmed in there. And we tend to think that because of that, the brain is in charge. Okay, the vagus nerve is creating my stress responses. It's telling my body what's safe or not. But, it's more complicated than that because the vagus nerve does run down from the brain, like all the way down to what's called the enteric nervous system, the gut of the body, the set of neurotransmitters and our microbiome, our digestive system down in the abdomen. But what we found is that the gut reactions, how we feel about things, how we're digesting, how our bacteria in the gut are operating or not, the healthy bacteria, those messages actually climb up the vagus nerve. Like 80 to 90% of our reactions and our creation of stress responses actually go from the gut to the brain. So our body stores because of the vagus nerve programming, what we believe to be stressful or not. So stress is an automatic response. What stressed us in the past, guess what? It's going to stress us right now, unless we learned how to get out of that really old kind of dinosaur kind of a loop.
So many people have issues with self-love and self-compassion. How does self-compassion and empathy come to play in healing the wounded self?
It's everything. I'd say self-love and self-forgiveness, because when we were initially traumatized, whether it's this life, a past life, whatever we want to reach to, trauma is infliction from outside to in. It was not our fault. But because when we're young or in different circumstances, at some level we want to think it's our fault so then we can change, so we can stop bad things from happening again. That's a setup to not love ourselves, to think of ourselves as bad and to have shame. That's a setup to not hold others accountable too when we're older. That's a setup to not forgive ourselves because we caused the dysfunction or the abuse or the problem. We didn't. Trauma's outside to in. And even if we weren't loved, we can learn to love ourselves. Even if we, hold ourselves responsible for some adult behaviors, when we got traumatized, we were being victimized. So why wouldn't we forgive ourselves for any reactions that we've had?
One of my life lessons has been about giving myself the same love and attention that I've given others constantly. And I remember a line from the Moody Blues song Question, written by Justin Hayward: when you stop and think about it, you won't believe it's true, that all the love you've been giving has all been meant for you. Isn't that so? Isn't it?
Oh, that's beautiful. And it's so true. And I don't know about you, Victor, or the listeners, but it's taken me many and most of my decades in this life to love myself. I can actually say that I do. But even a year ago, I teach a lot of classes, and one in-person class at a local university. I knew all those people because I taught them several Saturdays. And one day, one of them looked at me and said, you need to let more love in. I go, yeah, I think I do. So she said, okay, the entire class is going to send you love, and you better darn let that in. Isn't that sweet? And they weren't, out of, we'd been working on love this whole time. So the students taught the teacher. And so we can self-love. And sometimes it means making ourselves let some love in and going, okay, even if I'm kind of embarrassed, even if this is scary, I'm going to feel this.
Yeah. Making ourselves available to that energy.
Absolutely.
How may we create a protective field to filter incoming forces of energy?
Okay, I'm going to tell you what I think is the easiest way to do that, because there's lots and lots of techniques, and you can Google lots of them. I believe that our essential spirit, like the who we really are, that's connected to whatever you want to call the source, is inside of us all the time. I have this nerdy approach to the chakras and the cells that I believe there's an outer layer, say for instance, to the chakras and even to our cells, and an inner layer, like a donut hole. And the inner layer has our own spirit, and it's where we have our light, and our light mixes with the greater light. I like doing protection by concentrating on the inner wheel of any of my energy centers or inside the depth of my heart. And as soon as I'm able to sort of awaken and sense that inner light, that inner sound, that inner me, I just ask what's greater. It can even be a greater part of myself to stir that. And then I start emanating. Because think of it. If you're the sun, like let's say you're your own sunlight, ain't nothing getting into the center of the sun. It's not, the sun is going to burn anything out that's not good for it way before it gets to the core. So this is a way of helping to push out what's not good for us and allow in only what is good for us. So the short word is just beam. Just let yourself beam from the core out.
And the techniques and exercises you offer in energy healing will help to improve our relationships with others and with ourselves, won't they?
They will. Yep, it's with ourselves and it's with others. You know, these are the ways that I've worked with clients, but also myself. And I find that I hardly ever trigger anymore. I'm calm in challenging situations. I even had COVID, but I was only sick for a day. I was traveling for baseball. My son got it. I got it. We didn't really know what it was back then. I woke up and I thought, this is not normal. Well, I don't want it. I don't want it. So I used some of the techniques that are in the book. And the next day I woke up and I felt pretty darn good. I was tired. I didn't tell myself I had COVID either, which probably helped. So I think they're very useful techniques for like short-term issues that we go through, as well as healing older traumas.
My guest is Cyndi Dale. Her new book, Energy Healing for Trauma, Stress, and Chronic Illness. Cyndi, one more time, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you and your amazing work.
Well, thank you. I am at cyndidale.com. That's my website, spelled weird, CYNDI, Dale.com. And my book is on Amazon. So everybody's doing Amazon right now. So that should be like right at your fingertips.
Cyndi, thank you so much for joining us and sharing all of this wonderful work that you do.
Thank you, Victor. Thank you for doing the same.
And thank you for joining us on Destination Unlimited. I'm Victor the Voice Fuhrman. Have a wonderful week.